Could Megumi have more than one curse technique? We're going to talk about that and some other questions from you guys, but spoilers beware if you're not caught up on the manga. All right, before we dive in really quick, y'all, got one piece of business. I got a poll over on the YouTube channel to help decide what style of emotes we're going to have for our YouTube members. I commissioned two different artists, so we got two different styles. So far, style one is winning, and I think that's the one I prefer as well. But go make your voice be heard. Everyone can vote, not just YouTube members. Let me know which one you guys like better. So our first question today comes from Loki, and apologize for the kind of weird wording about it. Will Megumi have more than one curse technique? But I wanted to make that spoiler free for any anime onlys. What the question actually is will Megumi get access to Sukuna's shrine the same way Yuji has? So let's break that down. I think it's definitely possible because we know that Yuji got it due to the curse technique kind of engraving itself on his body because he was Sukuna's vessel. Well, Megumi is now Sukuna's vessel, so shouldn't the same thing be true? Well, let's take a quick look at Yuji. You gotta remember that it was the beginning of the manga when Gojo said Sukuna's technique will one day be engraved on your body. And at that point, Gojo wouldn't have known anything about the connections between Yuji and Sukuna, meaning Yuji is the son of Sukuna's twin brother reincarnated. Not only that, Kinjaku did whatever the hell he did to make Yuji a perfect vessel, right? So some might argue that that's why Yuji was able to get Sukuna's curse technique, but I disagree because, again, Gojo said this at the start of the story before he knew any of that. So presumably the main thing for having a technique engraved on your body is just time with your body getting access to that technique. So if that's the metric, then Megumi too should theoretically get access to this. The question then becomes, well, how long does this take? Because Sukuna was obviously in Yuji for a longer amount of time, but interestingly, in Megumi's body, Sukuna has had control far longer than he ever did in Yuji's body. Also, he's used the technique far more than he ever did in Yuji's body. So, if it's just purely like exposure therapy, then I think Megumi would have reached the same benchmarks that Yuji did. Then it just becomes a matter of how to activate it, because we know that Yuji had to awaken it via his black flashes. However, there is one other thing to consider here, and that's the fact that Yuji didn't have a curse technique to begin with. So it's at least feasible that it makes it easier to imprint a technique on somebody that doesn't already have one, right? They're a blank slate. Whereas Megumi already had the 10 shadows, so maybe it's a more difficult process to then get engraved a second technique on your body. However, the counter to that is Kinjaku. He obviously has multiple techniques from multiple bodies. Now, that's most likely related to his specific curse technique, but we don't really know how all of that operates still. In any case, though, he's proof of concept that a sorcerer with an original technique can gain additional techniques. So again, for my money, I think it's highly possible that Megumi, assuming he comes out the other side of this whole endeavor, could gain access to Shrine. Now, will he have it just immediately? I don't think so. I think he would have to awaken it in the same way Yuji did, but I do think that's a possibility. It's just really whether or not Gege wants to go that direction in the story. But I think the prerequisites have been met, for that to make sense. Now, speaking of Kinjaku, our next question comes from M, and he wanted to know my thoughts on this moment as it relates to Kori Itadori. So if you recall, here Geto fights back and chokes Kinjaku when he is trapping Gojo in the prison realm. And presumably this is because this elicited a response from whatever's left of Geto due to the bond between Gojo and Geto. However, if this form of pushback from the vessel is based on strength of bond, where, their body is now being used to harm somebody they loved, then you would have imagined Kaori would have fought back at some point, considering Kinjaku was using her body to manipulate her husband. And yet, that never happened because, again, Kenny tells us this is the first time a body has ever fought back. So what does that mean? And to me, I don't think that means that Gojo and Geto had a stronger bond than Kaori and Jin. For me, it makes the most sense to just assume that Geto was that much stronger. He was that much more powerful a sorcerer, so some amount of him remained in order to fight back in that moment. I don't think that Kaori maybe had that same level of strength, if we can call it that. But to be fair, we really don't know anything about Kaori other than that she's Yuji's mom and that she had a curse technique. Because for all we know, Kaori was a powerful sorcerer, right? But even if that was the case, I do think Geto, who was known as one of the strongest, still would have been stronger than her, no matter what the circumstance was. So I still think his strength, if we can call it that, is probably a sufficient explanation for how he was able to fight back. But M throws in some interesting headcanon here, and M says that Kaori could have been a Jujutsu sorcerer that was actually tasked with hunting down Sukuna's fingers. And so perhaps on that journey, she ran into Jin, considering that he, again, is the reincarnated twin brother of Sukuna. You know, perhaps he would have pinged on the radar when she was looking for fingers. And then, lo and behold, she falls in love, so she abandons Jujutsu sorcery, and then the rest is history. And I think this is a really cool headcanon, but hopefully we find out more about Kaori in some form of another, and maybe we can put a little bit more of these pieces together. Next up, I got a couple questions from Malthazar, starting with how far do I think Sukuna would have gotten in the Sukuna gauntlet if he didn't have Kamutoke? Meaning, when Higuruma confiscated that, since it wouldn't have been there, it would have instead confiscated his curse technique, Shrine. And I think if that happened, honestly, not much changes. And there's a few reasons why. One, maybe he would still have access to 10 Shadows, so we can just throw that out there, but I'm going to assume he wouldn't have had access to that either. Let's just say Sukuna, without any curse technique, is thrust into that situation. I think he is strong enough to still handle everybody at that point, because we know that he wasn't really trying at that point, and he's just so much stronger than everybody else. I think he can deal with Higuruma hand to hand if he needs to, especially if that would make him start taking things more seriously. And I'm of the belief that even if his technique had been confiscated, if he then were to take out Higuruma, I think he would have gotten it back. Just because the way confiscate, you know, it means take away. It doesn't mean like delete forever, right? So I think he would have just probably taken things a little more seriously, immediately dispatched Higuruma, and then gotten his technique back. And then Devil's Advocate, if we assume the curse technique doesn't come back, then I agree, he does get beaten, because if nothing else, he really needs that domain to deal with the amount of people that end up coming at him. And then for your second question here, you ask, who do I think would win between Sukuna and Adam from Record of Ragnarok? And I have never seen Record of Ragnarok, but you guys can't see it. Malthazar did provide me a little quick synopsis of what Adam is capable of, so take this with a grain of salt, because again, haven't seen it, but from what you told me about Adam, the way his like reflexes are so fast due to his eyes and he can copy anybody he comes against, he seems to just be on another level than Sukuna. But yeah, I would love to hear y'all's thoughts that have actually seen both of these shows. Next up, we got another gauntlet question from Sean, who wants to know who wins between these goats, Miguel, Todo, Choso, or Kusakabe, in a 1v1 scenario and in a free-for-all scenario. And honestly, in both cases, I think it's gonna be Todo, but there's an argument to be made for Miguel. I think Miguel and Todo are just on another level compared to the other two, no disrespect to them, but I think this really boils down to how the black rope is going to interfere, if at all, with Todo's swaps. We don't know like too much about the rope. We basically only saw it in JJK 0. We know it interfered with Limitless, but that was from like striking it, right? So Todo, who can swap without really getting close to you or needing to like interact with you directly at all, will the rope even do anything? And I would argue that it might. It might when Todo is like up close hand to hand, like maybe just the presence of it at all would mess with things. And if that's the case, I think Miguel maybe has a slightly better chance, but even still, I just trust in Todo's IQ and just the general chaos in the free-for-all. I think Todo would win with the swaps. But when it comes to the 1v1 battle, maybe Miguel takes him. It's really hard to say, but in any case, pre-post Vibraslap, I don't really think matters that much, just because with Vibraslap, obviously, he gets way more insane. But even without it, I think he's going to be okay for the most part in a 1v1 scenario or a free-for-all like that. So I'm going Todo, but I'm obviously biased because he's one of my favorite characters. Y'all let me know your thoughts. That's all for this one, y'all. Thank you so much for watching, and only a little over 2 days till the next chapter, so we're almost there.